Hey, it's Clay at claytrader.com. So can you get started in trading? Can you get started in the stock market as a beginner with just $100? I want to respect your time, so I'm going to answer that question right from the start here. Yeah, you absolutely can. In fact, on the screen here, you can see how I started an account with $100, and now that account is valued over $6,000. With all that being said, from a transparency and disclosure point of view, does this happen overnight? Is this a situation where, hey, I have $100 and then 2 weeks from then you're out shopping for your Tesla in Beachside Mansion? Unfortunately, no. I get it. A lot of people out there imply that. I mean, it's a great sales and marketing, ploy. But the truth of the matter is, no, that's not how it works. It does take time, and that's really the first thing to get, point out and first note to make is, you can get started with $100, and the but is, you need to go into this with a realistic mindset. You need to go into this with a framework of how things actually work. And the fact of the matter is, as maybe anticlimactic as it may be, it just takes time. But if you are able to accept that, and if you're okay with that, then yeah, you can definitely get started with $100. Preferably, you start with more than $100. So that's something to keep in mind as we go through some numbers here, that had you started with even a little bit more, the numbers add up that much quicker. But we're going to use $100 from the baseline to show that it is definitely possible. Now, a little distinction here. There are two forms that you can go about this from a money management point of view, and that is active income versus passive income. What you see on the screen here is actually from a passive approach, and in fact, in a couple weeks, I'm going to be putting out a video of how this actually occurred, how I created this source of passive income. So keep an eye on the channel for that video. But you can also take an active income approach, and that's what I want to go over here is how you can be active and still grow that $100. But I also don't want to talk in theory. I want to use actual real-world numbers, and I want to take a real-world example so that we can see how this would have played out, in the real world. There's nothing worse than just sitting there like you're in school and you have a textbook and you're like, okay, well, that's great. That's all theory though. Can we take some real world examples? So that's what we're going to do here. For some quick context, at claytrader.com, I offer a subscription service. And part of that service is I send out my weekly scans and, alerts. And this is one of those from that scan. So I bring that up just so you know that this was actually sent out to members, and this all played out in the real world, and it's also giving us some actual numbers to work with. So the alert here was just based off of the fact that the price had come down here and bounced off that level on two separate occasions before. So that's kind of besides the point. What I'm really after though is let's look at some numbers, because with numbers we can see, and you can kind of just visualize much better how the $100 would begin to grow. So in this case, as I mentioned up here, $2.90, and then down there you can see once again $2.90. So that's $2.90 per share. So if you want to buy one share, it would cost $290. And because you would be starting with $100, well, hey, there you go. You can definitely afford more than one share. So let's walk through those numbers. First thing first, I hear it quite a bit with beginning traders that are new to the stock market, and they think that they need some sort of finance degree or degree in mathematics. No, nothing like that. So very happy to report that, none of that is required. As long as you can use a calculator, do some basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, then as you'll see here, the math is very, very easy. So the first thing you need to just figure out is, okay, well, how many? That's the first question. How many shares can I actually buy? So what will this $100 buy me when each price per share, as we just talked about, is $2.90? So let's plug those numbers in, and you just put, the $100 over $2.90, and that's how you do it. You just divide, pull out the calculator. The good news is, though, that in all actuality, online platforms, online apps that you can use, they're going to do all this for you. But it's always good to know just in general how it works. So that's the basic way you would go about it. So after doing the basic calculation, you would be able to purchase 34 shares. So at this point, let's jump into the real world and see how these results actually played out for members of the community that would have partaken in this. But for us, as a reference point and using an example, we'll use these numbers, like I said, as they actually occurred in the real world of trading. What you see on the screen, if you're not familiar, it's just called a technical chart. I offer lots of other videos on this, but this is just going to serve us a purpose to see how the stock price acted, and then what it offered up, from an actual, trading perspective. So just going to kind of go through things here. That green line down there represents the $2.90 mark. So you can see the price eventually went down there, and then 2 days in a row would have allowed for, the $100 to be put to use at $2.90. So let's just see how the price played out after that. So you can see it begins to move upwards, always a good thing. Moves up some more, moves up that much more, always a good thing. And then continue to go up that much more. And so far, it's gone up as high as $4.33. So again, $4.33 is as high as it went up. That is what it's being represented by that area right there. Again, $4.43. Once again, very happy to report that there is nothing complicated at all going on from the math. A basic calculation that we all learned how to do way back in elementary school, some subtraction. And the numbers you just need to know are, what did you sell your shares for? So the selling price, and then you just subtract out what you purchased those shares for. So again, in this situation, that's that $2.90 number, which we've been talking about. So again, very simple. What did you sell the shares for? What price? And then you subtract the purchase price from that number. So there we have our numbers. Again, $2.90 right there. Maybe you're saying, wait a second, Clay, you said the price went as high as $4.43, and right here you only have $4.15. Very good eye if you were thinking that. But the one thing to keep in mind is it's very hard to make the perfect trade, meaning you sell right at the very top of the movement before it goes back down. Is that possible? Sure, it's possible, but for accuracy's sake and just to keep this as honest and realistic as possible, we're not going to assume that you made a perfect trade. So let's just assume that you sold it at $4.15, and sure, it did ultimately end up going to $4.43, but again, very difficult to make the perfect trade. So for our numbers, we're going to use the selling price of $4.15. And that would give us $1.25 profit per share. So for each share you own, you are making $1.25. And then the last step here, we need to figure out the total profit. So how much did you actually make? How much did this $100 generate for you? How much did it put into your pocket? Once more, very, very straightforward math. You're just going to take, well, how many shares do you own? Again, how many shares did you actually buy? And then you're going to multiply that by the profit per share, which we just calculated. Thinking back to that first calculation we did, hopefully you remember that number, but we were able to buy 34 shares. And then as we just calculated, the profit per share was $1.25. So 34 multiplied by 125. And that would leave you with a total profit of $42.50. 34 shares, you made $1.25 per share, and that equals $42.50 in total profit. Now, this is where things get really interesting and, quite frankly, really powerful, but think about it. The $100, yeah, that's no more. Why? Well, because we got that $42.50 profit. Your total account value would now be worth $142.50. So there has been some growth. You have grown that $100 to now having a total account value of $142.50. I want to take this one step further, though, so you can show just how these gains can build upon one another. Now, to keep the numbers simple so we don't have to go through everything all over again, let's just use the same exact situation as far as that stock that we watched play out. But let's just assume that you had actually started with $142.50. That way you know all the numbers already. But $142.50, now putting that into play, and let's see how much of a difference that extra, which doesn't maybe seem like a whole lot, $42.50, but let's see what that would actually do. So quickly going through the numbers here, first off, that number should look very familiar. That was the price per share in our example, $2.90. But the one difference here being, instead of using that $100, we're now using $142.50, which means that we can now, instead of the original amount of shares we could buy, we can now actually get 49 shares. So think about that. First time through, you could only get 34 shares. But by just gaining another $42.50, that number is now up to 49 shares that you could buy. So from 34 shares on our original example to now 49 shares. That's a big difference. To finish off the math, we have our 49 shares. Again, just keeping the numbers the exact same. That $1.25 would be the profit per share. Remember, we're not assuming that anybody made a perfect trade, but still able to get $1.25 profit per share. Now, all of a sudden, because you had 49 shares instead of the 34, that would generate a total profit of $61.25. So that quick, now all of a sudden generating profits not in the $40 range, but up in the $60 range. Now, where would that leave the numbers? Well, at this point, again, we no longer have $142.50 in your account because you need to add in that $61.25 that we just calculated, which means the new account value would be $203.73. So you start with 100, but then it grows and then it compounds. Maybe you've learned in school about compounding interest and just the idea of compounding. Well, this is compounding in the real world, and it's the best topic really that they should teach a lot more in school because you just witnessed it right here. This is compounding in action, compounding in the real world. And, you can see right here, there is a growth coming. Now, again, are you going to be able to go out and buy your Tesla with $203.75? No, you're not going to be shopping for mansions on the beach. But my goal here was to show you that there is growth occurring and that you can make growth happen. At this point, I'm assuming you're thinking, all right, that's awesome, Clay, that you can actually grow. But how do you even buy stocks? Where do you buy stocks? Well, that's where you would need an online brokerage or an app brokerage, same thing in the world of the stock market. And what I would recommend is Webull. I'll put a link down in the description. And the cool thing about Webull is they'll actually give you a free stock, if you use that link. So just keep that in mind that if you want to get invested, if you want to start to grow, then Webull is a great choice to use for that. Link down in the description box, and you can check that out. Also, there are lots of other videos on the channel that walk you through how to buy a stock. What is the stock market? How do stocks make you money? Now, of course, hopefully I accomplish a lot of that with this video, but I do offer a whole lot of other videos for beginning traders and those looking to get started in the stock market on the channel as a whole. So on that note, definitely be sure to subscribe to the channel, and you can check out whenever I'm releasing new videos. Like I said, today we talked about active income and how I grew that $100 to over $6,000, but in the future, I'm going to be releasing how I did that through passive income. So by subscribing, you'll know exactly when that video is released. So hopefully you learned some things. If you have any questions, I'm here to help. Leave those down in the comment section down below. Or if you have any suggestions for future videos, I would love that too. But if nothing else, if you enjoyed this video and like me to keep making videos such as this, then hit that like button and also leave me a comment below and just say, hey, Clay, thanks. Please keep making these, and I will, devote my time to doing these. And also, like I said, just make sure to subscribe to the channel so that you can keep up to date on all the other videos that I release in the future. So thank you for hanging out. Get out there and start growing. Keep things from a realistic standpoint, but it's possible as long as you go in there with a grounded in reality perspective and you have a strategy in place and you go about things in a very wise way, which again, that's what the channel is designed for, to help you go about all this, to approach the markets and approach growing money in a wise and methodical way. So thanks for hanging out.